Hi, I'm Elisha Wood-Charlson. Shane, thank you for that setup. That was great. And it's also nice to hear people's stories of how they have these self-realizations, self-actualizations as community managers. I went through the same process. So I was part of the 2017 CEFP program. And so I definitely have started to mature how I think about communities a little bit more, and has actually been able to start a new project that got funded last year. So it's only about a year in. So it's like a brand new, it's an existing community, but it's a brand new project. And so I've been thinking a little bit about how to build a sense of community when there's already a kind of a community in existence, but then also how to bring people on board to a new project and get buy-in and establish trust and sort of those mechanisms that are definitely required for communities to be successful from a community manager perspective. So I'll present a little bit on this concept of tiered engagement that we're working with, which is designed to hopefully meet community members where they are. I have no data on whether this is going to work or not, so this is definitely all a theoretical presentation. Hopefully this time next year, I'll have a little bit better idea if this works. My other community manager on the call is Pajao, and so she's also going to be helping with a lot of this. Okay, so a quick background on what this particular project is. It's called the National Microbiome Data Collaborative, and we're really trying to structure sort of two priorities across one vision. The vision really is about just making microbiome data discoverable. And a lot of times when we talk to people in the microbiome community, the first barrier to doing research is actually finding relevant data to the questions that you have. And so that's what we're really trying to work towards, is allowing people to explore and find data in a way that isn't currently possible through a single interface. So we're focusing on engagement, really working across various levels of this community, including researchers, funders, publishers, and scientific societies. And then infrastructure, really thinking through how to make the data accessible, how to integrate the data in a way, process the data so that it's actually comparable through the analysis workflows, and then working with the community on how to actually apply particular standards so the data are then actually discoverable by machine learning mechanisms and other things. So trying to basically take the research scientists who each have their own boutique Excel spreadsheet that they like to capture descriptors about data and turn it into something that other people can actually understand and use, and that machines can actually explore. So across building out this collaborative data science ecosystem, like I said, we're trying to really lower the barriers to discovery and access through working through standards, building out infrastructure, and then doing a lot of community engagement. And we're working towards this concept of fair data, which AGU has been a huge proponent for and really started the motivation in their sciences for that. So making data findable and accessible, interoperable and reusable, and we're really focused on findable and accessible. But the community engagement part is really trying to focus on amplifying everyone's contributions. What we're really trying to do kind of covertly in this process is actually change the culture of how people think about sharing data in the microbiome space. So really, how do you start to provide credit and attribution for sharing of data sets prior to the 7 Nature papers you think you're going to get out of your PhD, right? So how do we actually give people enough credit and enough attribution for those data sets, give them enough quantitative metrics for how those data sets are used in other data sets for publications, so that that can actually start to translate into review for promotion and tenure, for example. So it actually starts to become a way that the data sharing could start to become a factor instead of just publications. And how do we move science in that direction? So that's the culture change that we're hoping to actually do by amplifying everyone's contributions early and often in this scientific process. So part of the reason I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the NMDC community, even though this community isn't necessarily relevant to everyone on the call, is that I want to really emphasize that the communities that you work with are probably multi-layered in how you can slice and dice them, right? So if I was to ask you, what is a particular way, who do you identify in your community? Is there an actual box that you can put them in? And when we started thinking about community for the NMDC and in the tiered engagement, we really wanted to make sure that we could think about finding representation that everyone in the community could identify with. So we broke it up into several different categories. So for our community, there's sort of the science domain specific. There's air microbiologists, there's soil microbiologists, there's water aquatic microbiologists, host associated, human environment, built environment, etc. So there's a lot of different research domains, and some of them have their own societies, some of them have their own networks, some of them get funding from different places. Then there's employers. And so our community can be divided up for, there could be research faculty in an academic institution. They could be researchers in the government organization. They could be industry. They could be working at a company. They could be working in a nonprofit. So there's that whole sector, and there's different ways you would necessarily relate to them. And then there's, sort of the obvious demographics, to making sure that you're being inclusive in who you're talking to, so that everyone you're talking to has a diverse perspective of how they think about community. And then there's career stage. Are you talking about students, grad students, early career, mid-career, established faculty? And so each one of those different slices really could have a different kind of persona or a different goal that they're looking for. And so how do you meet your community at the place that they are at the time that they're there? And then related to that, we have this broad section of the community. Each one of those 4 categories could apply to researchers, obviously, but they could apply to funders as well. There's definitely people that come from academia that go into NSF, for example, and are program managers. And so their employer changes, their career stage changes, their domain might broaden or shrink. And so each one of them are just going to have slightly different goals that they're professionally looking for in order to move through. Publishers is another example, and then of course societies. And societies are great because they really do a lot of work to reach out to different demographics and different career stages. And so those are definitely the areas that we want to make sure that we can align our goals and how we build community, because they're great resources for those. So the main point of this slide is really that to identify how we had to think through each one of these different webs of potential networks that we're trying to work through, and how do you actually figure out key points along that stage so that you have good representation. So people from that various section of pie, or however multi-matrix you want to do that, how do they actually self-identify in a way that they feel represented in your community? So that brought up this concept of tiered engagement, where we're trying to produce a sense of community and shared ownership at all levels of involvement. This is a data project, and so people are going to be contributing data sets to this platform so that other people can find it, or people are going to be finding data sets that people contribute. So we really want to build that sense of shared ownership, because without the data, there's no real point in building this, right? If you build it, they will come. That doesn't actually work in community engagement. So we wanted to divide up our community in several different categories. First of all, the community is open to anyone that works with microbiome data. It could be citizen science, it could be NIH, it doesn't matter. Everyone is considered part of our community, and we're trying to welcome them in any way we can. We're transitioning community into what we're calling collaborator once somebody either contributes data to the platform or cites data on the platform, because then you're actually interacting with the platform, interacting with the goals that we have, and starting to move things forward. And so you become a collaborator. We also call them a collaborator because once you either cite or contribute data, then any attribution follows you all the way through. So anything you do on our platform will get tagged to an ORCID account, and any data sets that you contribute, attribution will follow you all the way through. So you're actively contributing to that, and your contributions will be acknowledged. First, we have a champions program. The champions program isn't necessarily specific to this particular pilot. It is specific to the fact that people are willing to advocate for fair microbiome data and good data management best practices. So we really are just looking for people in the community that do this already, and we want to elevate them and call them our champions. We have a website for them. We can send them hoodies with our logo on it. So it's a small reward, but these are people that are already doing this in the community that have been willing to sign on to be our champion. Then the final step is the concept of an ambassador. It's a much more interactive component where we're asking people to do stuff. We will also do this stuff for them. This is a much more involved program. We haven't started this up yet, but Pajal will be running this program. The ambassador really is someone who is going to be able to speak on behalf. So they'll be able to give talks at conferences whenever those happen again in person. They'll be able to give talks on conferences. We're asking them to actually run outreach events. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But the idea is that they're actually people that are focused on the particular mission and vision of the NMDC, not just fair data and open science. So a quick example of what this looks like for the American Society for Microbiology. The society at large is all focused on microbiome research, so we're considering that part of our community. Any members of the community that publish data with the NMDC would be considered a collaborator. One of the ASM members, Alana Wright, is one of our champions. And then the CEO, Stefano, is on our ambassador program as he's part of our advisory board. So there's different layers that people can be involved in depending upon how much they want to actually be engaged with the project. So related to what Jane had mentioned, part of the reason why I like the community model that Lou and Kitty have done beautiful colors for and really carved up quite nicely, as opposed to the life cycle model, is that not everybody is going to move through this ever. Not everybody's going to move through this at the same time. I don't actually even want everybody to be in the ambassador stage because Pajot would probably kill me trying to manage 200 people, right? So the whole point is to really spread this out and let people collaborate or contribute or convey and consume wherever they feel most comfortable. And the other goal is really to make sure that there is the ability for people to move forward when they're ready, professionally, something they have more time in their life, they're really excited about a project, and also move backwards. They had a kid, they had to move, they are now in a different country, they lost their job because of COVID. Like, so the whole point is that it's a fluid model where people can move back and forth depending upon what life brings them, what they need in their professional development, and really to meet them where they are. And so our goal is to figure out what slices of those community, how we can meet them where they are, how we can support them where they need us to be. And these are different ways that we're thinking about building our programming that people can go through back and forth along this model, wherever they're comfortable at the time. So while someone right now might be a champion, maybe they need to step back and just be a collaborator for a little while because they're working on a privately funded project and they're not allowed to release the data. That's totally fine. When they're ready to do more open science again and their funding opportunities allow them to do that, we'll put them back as a champion. So really to be inclusive as possible is what we're hoping for. So these are just some of the lovely faces. I like to show our champions because I think they're really special people. Again, these are advocating for fair data and open science already, and we just appreciate them very much for that. We also tag them for any of the UX experience iterative development for our portal, so they're actually giving us active feedback as we're building this out. And then again, the ambassador program, this is going to be a bit more extensive and will require a lot more touch points with us. But what we're trying to do is use the ambassadors to really build a sense of community at all levels. So partly because of COVID, we're going to ramp this up in a little bit different way. But the goal is, I think, for the ambassador program to have localized representation in those different slices of community that kind of give sort of centralized nucleating points. So it's not just Pajot and I that are the face of the NMDC, it's our ambassadors that are actually the face of it. And then they can start to recruit, champion the collaborators and community and help us with that process. So some of the success would be, broadening community engagement through various ways that we can support the ambassadors, but also really to, once we start to see self-recruitment, if our ambassadors are finding that people in our community are self-identifying as wanting to be champions or ambassadors in the next program, I think that's a good success for the initial ambassador program. And then also, longer term, obviously, we'd like to get the community leaders to sign on to this commitment to produce microbiome data that's actually fair. And we'd like to get to a point where the NMDC becomes a household name. So that was all I had.